She once managed every moment of Keanu Reeves's life, then vanished without a word. Now, 12 years later, he finds her cold, hungry, and homeless by a dumpster. Why did she disappear? And what terrible secret was she protecting all these years? Stay with us, because what Keanu does next will shock you. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun hadn't fully risen over the hills of Telluride, but the soft gold edges of morning were already brushing the rooftops with promise. Keanu Reeves walked slowly behind the historic Victorian Hotel, a quiet shortcut he'd discovered years ago, during one of the first times he attended this small, passionate film festival. It was the kind of place where people cared more about stories than celebrities, where he could disappear into panels, sip coffee unnoticed, and feel, for a few days, like just another artist again. He wore his usual black hoodie and well-worn boots, hands in his pockets. His mind was still lingering on a short documentary he'd seen the night before, something about a coal miner turned sculptor. It had stirred something in him. He'd planned to head straight for the morning panel on independent distribution, but something about the silence of the alley called to him. Maybe he just wanted to savor a moment of stillness. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a figure move behind the dumpster near the rear service door. At first, he almost kept walking. There were often people back here, janitors, delivery drivers, even the occasional fan trying to catch a glimpse. But this person was different. The woman wasn't rummaging like someone desperate. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She reached into the bin and carefully pulled out what looked like a half-wrapped sandwich from the hotel's catering, then turned to examine a near-empty coffee cup someone had tossed aside. There was a strange, practiced elegance in the way she moved, like someone who had once carried herself with dignity. Something in her posture was familiar. The tilt of her head, the way she brushed her hair back with a flick of her fingers. Keanu took a few steps forward, barely breathing. Then she looked up, and his entire body stopped. His breath caught in his throat as their eyes met, even just for a moment. The gauntness in her face, the way her cheeks had hollowed, the fine lines etched around her mouth. None of it could erase who she was. Maggie Steele, his assistant, his right hand. The woman who had once answered every call, held every secret, scheduled every step of his life, from 2005 to 2013. The woman who had stood beside him through his sister Kim's cancer recurrence. The one who helped him shift from big-budget action films to quiet, artful projects that mattered to his soul. The woman who had vanished, without a word, without a letter. One day she was there, arranging meetings and shielding him from the press. The next, her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. Everyone had theories. A family emergency, a burnout, a betrayal. He never found out. And now she was standing here, in rags. Her coat was torn at the sleeve, her shoes didn't match. Her hair, once clipped back in sleek, careful lines, hung loose and unwashed. She looked like she'd been on the streets for months, maybe longer. But what struck him most was her face. When she looked at him, there was no flicker of recognition, no spark, no surprise. She simply lowered her eyes, shifted her weight, and began to walk away as if he were a stranger. And maybe to her now, he was. Keanu stood frozen, heart pounding. His instincts screamed to call out, to chase after her, but something in her expression, something guarded and resigned, told him not to. Not yet. She walked slowly down the alley, her backpack slumped heavily on her shoulders. Every step looked like it carried a weight beyond hunger or fatigue. It was the kind of weight only deep loss could bring. He watched her until she disappeared around the corner, and suddenly, the quiet morning didn't feel peaceful anymore. Keanu remained in place, eyes fixed on the spot where she had vanished. His thoughts raced faster than his heartbeat. Could it really be her, after all these years? Could the woman who once ordered his flights with military precision and brought his mother flowers on her birthday really be the same woman, searching trash bins for scraps? He thought back to those years. Maggie had been more than an assistant. She was a stabilizing force in a chaotic time. During the worst of his sister's illness, when grief and guilt had nearly pulled him under, she'd kept him anchored. She handled the doctor's calls when he couldn't. She shielded him from tabloids during Kim's hospital stays, absolutely. And when he decided to take a break from blockbuster sets and do a quiet film about silence and grief, it was Maggie who'd track down the reclusive director who would change his career forever. She never asked for recognition, never tried to be in the spotlight. She was the kind of person who noticed what others missed, who left reminders on his fridge for birthdays he forgot, and always packed extra snacks when he traveled. She worked impossible hours and never once complained, except when it came to the press. Maggie hated the spotlight, loathed it. The moment a tabloid once ran her photo next to his, she'd gone quiet for days. And now, this. The last time he'd even heard her name was from his former agent, who mentioned she'd moved somewhere east. That was nearly a decade ago. But here she was, without explanation, wandering behind a hotel with no idea she'd just locked eyes with someone who once trusted her more than anyone. Why was she pretending not to know him? Or worse, had she truly forgotten? He turned to look in the trash bin she had just left. A crumpled paper napkin, an untouched banana with a single brown bruise. She'd taken the sandwich and the coffee, nothing else. No blanket, no water, no safe place in sight. The alley behind the hotel was clean but sterile and too exposed. Anyone from the festival could have walked past and seen her. If she was hiding, this wasn't a good spot. Keanu backed away and sat on a low concrete step, still facing the alley. He needed to think, not act. Not yet. He couldn't just walk up to her, not when she clearly didn't want to be seen. If it was really Maggie, and he was now certain it was, then her silence wasn't an accident. There was a reason she left without a goodbye, and there was a reason she was still keeping her distance. The question was, what had happened in the years between? A life like hers didn't just collapse overnight. She was smart, careful, always prepared. For her to end up like this, something catastrophic had to have happened. And whatever it was, Keanu had a sickening feeling it wasn't over. He rose slowly from the step and looked once more down the alley. He had to find her again. Not to confront, but to understand, because something told him this story was only just beginning. Back in 2005, Keanu Reeves was drifting in a fog. His fame was relentless, but it brought him no comfort. Tabloids followed his every step, twisting his quiet nature into something mysterious or broken. His sister Kim's cancer had returned after a few years of remission, and the weight of watching her suffer again had broken something in him. He'd pulled back from the world, the red carpets, the interviews, even some of his closest friends. That was the year Maggie Steele entered his life. She arrived without drama, just a quiet resume handed to his longtime agent. No frills, just a list of impeccable credentials, years of work with production teams, charity organizations, and a background in event logistics. But what caught his eye was the cover letter. It was direct, calm, and startlingly honest. She wrote that she didn't want to be famous, didn't need flattery, and wasn't interested in being a celebrity assistant. What she offered, she wrote, was structure and silence. Their first meeting was brief. She wore a gray blazer, black flats, no jewelry. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her words were measured but kind. When he asked her what she thought of his last film, she didn't flatter him. She said she hadn't seen it. She said she'd seen him on a panel years earlier, speaking about loss, and that was what made her apply. He hired her on the spot. Within weeks, she changed everything. His schedule, once erratic and unmanageable, became a calm rhythm. Morning meetings were buffered with breathing space. Travel was no longer a blur of chaos. Maggie had a way of anticipating everything. What time he'd need quiet, which interviews to decline without drama, even when to leave tea waiting in the car on hospital days. She arranged his visits to Kim's hospital without alerting a single reporter. Nurses learned to speak with her before they spoke to him. When fans gathered outside, she gently moved them along with a smile and a phrase that became her signature. "Let's give him a little grace today." She never raised her voice, never complained. But when someone tried to leak photos of Keanu and Kim in the hospital, it was Maggie who tracked the source and shut it down. Quietly, legally, complete. Over the years, she became more than an assistant. She became the quiet backbone of his life. And she never asked for attention. Keanu remembered one Christmas when he insisted she go home to her family in Connecticut. She smiled and said she would. But on Christmas morning, when he walked into Kim's hospital room, Maggie was already there, a tray of warm muffins between them, her scarf dusted with snow. She never mentioned it, never explained. She simply said, "Let's take it 1 hour at a time." There were countless moments like that. When Keanu's flight got canceled in Tokyo and he was too exhausted to deal with the chaos, she had him on a private train to Kyoto within 30 minutes. When a co-star lashed out during a junket, Maggie handled the fallout before it even reached the press. When he needed space to grieve after a loss the world never knew about, she cleared his schedule for 3 weeks without ever explaining why to anyone. But what struck him most wasn't what she managed, it was how she carried herself. Maggie didn't try to be part of his world. She brought her own. Her desk was always neat. Her personal phone rang only during lunch. And yet, there was a sadness that occasionally slipped through the cracks, quickly masked, but not invisible to someone who paid attention. In 2009, during a shoot in Vancouver, Keanu noticed her sitting alone in the hotel lobby late at night. Her face was pale. Her hands shook as she looked at her phone. She didn't see him watching. The next morning, she was as composed as ever. But something was different. He asked if she was okay. She said yes. He asked again. She hesitated, then said quietly, "My husband was in a car accident back home. He's stable. They think he'll recover. I'm handling it." He offered to send her back to him, insisted even. But she shook her head. "You have a press day tomorrow. I already made arrangements for him. I'll go when things are calm." He didn't go for 2 more weeks. And when she came back, there was a tiredness in her that hadn't been there before, a quiet ache in her eyes that lingered. He never pressed her again. But now, sitting in a quiet cafe in Telluride, that memory haunted him. How many things had she carried in silence? She had been there through his shadows, through the tabloid cruelty, through the nights when his grief turned into isolation. She never turned away, never broke down, not in front of him. In 2013, when she left, she said it was for family reasons. She was kind, professional, and gave 3 weeks' notice. She helped transition the new assistant. She even wrote a thank you card. He remembered reading it alone in his trailer. It said, "You gave me purpose during a time when I felt invisible. I will never forget it. Please don't try to fix anything for me now. Just keep creating. That's all the thanks I need." He sent her flowers. She declined them. He sent money. She returned it. He offered to support her in any way she needed. She stopped replying. For years, he told himself she'd found peace somewhere, maybe caring for a parent, maybe starting over. But deep down, a small voice always questioned it, wondered if she had left not because she was needed elsewhere, but because she was breaking apart and no one noticed. He remembered how carefully she had erased herself from his world. No drama, no headlines, just a slow fade. Her email auto-reply had simply said, "This inbox is no longer monitored." And that was it. No one could find her. His team tried, quietly, just to check in, just to say thanks. But Maggie had vanished like a ghost. And now, after all these years, she was in an alley behind a hotel, searching for food with shaking hands, wearing shoes that didn't match, carrying everything she owned in a single worn-out backpack. Keanu leaned forward on the cafe table, his untouched coffee growing cold. He thought about the time she held his sister's hand during chemo, when Keanu couldn't bring himself to go in. Thought about the way she held back tears the day they got the news Kim's treatment had failed. She had never asked for anything, not once, and now she needed something. Maybe not help, maybe not a rescue, but something else. Maybe to be seen. He had spent years asking himself what he could have done differently, what signs he'd missed. Now he had a chance to find out, a chance to show her that everything she gave him still mattered, that she wasn't invisible. But to him, not now. And this time, he wouldn't wait for her to come to him. He would go to her. The morning after he saw her, Keanu woke before sunrise. He didn't know if it was worry or guilt that stirred him so early, but the image of Maggie's face, thinner, older, somehow gentler in its weariness, stayed with him through the night. The quiet ache in his chest hadn't let up. He left the hotel without breakfast, pulling on a hoodie and worn jeans, trying not to stand out. His steps were measured, almost cautious, as he made his way back to the alley behind the film festival venue. He wasn't sure what he'd find. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe it really wasn't her. But she was there. Maggie, or the woman he now knew couldn't be anyone else, sat with her back against a cracked brick wall, the rising sun casting long shadows behind her. She had a small styrofoam container of soup in her hands, which steamed softly in the morning chill. Her coat was still frayed, one sleeve stitched up with mismatched thread. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp curve of her cheekbones, her eyes still alert but sunken. She ate slowly, as if each spoonful carried meaning. Every movement was careful, quiet, precise, just like before. And then he saw it. In her lap rested a thin, battered notebook. Black cover, soft binding, the edges curled with time and weather. She held it close, one hand protectively across its spine. Every so often she'd put the soup down, flip to a page, and write something. The sight made something inside him twist. Maggie had always carried a notebook, schedules, reminders, fragments of poetry, sometimes even scribbled jokes, little things to keep herself grounded in a world she used to manage so gracefully. Keanu stood behind a dumpster, out of sight, his heart pounding harder than it should have. It had been over a decade since she'd left, a decade of wondering if she was okay, a decade of telling himself she just wanted privacy, that she had moved on. But this was something else. He followed her discreetly when she finally rose, slipping the notebook into her bag and lifting a too-heavy backpack onto her shoulders. She moved through the back streets with the same quiet confidence he remembered, but now there was a fatigue in her step, a limp he hadn't seen before. Her shoulders stooped, her pace slower. They didn't walk far. Just a few blocks away was a small brick building with hand-painted signs out front. Community meal hours, free showers on Wednesdays, clothing donations welcome. She stepped inside like she belonged. Keanu waited a few minutes, then pulled his hood lower and entered. The shelter's small lobby smelled of strong coffee and old paint. Volunteers moved briskly, folding donated clothes, sorting canned goods, organizing boxes. At the far end of the room, he saw her, Maggie. Now, seated near a bulletin board, quietly reading a flyer. A woman in her 50s approached him, her gray-streaked hair pulled back tight. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized him. "Mr. Reeves," she said in a hushed voice, not wanting to draw attention. "I'm Rosa. I run this place." He nodded, voice low. "The woman who just came in, she goes by Mary?" Rosa gave him a long, thoughtful look, then glanced toward Maggie. "Yes, Mary. She's been coming here for over a year. Used to live in her car, but it got towed months ago. Since then, she's been mostly on foot. Comes by for meals, keeps to herself." Keanu's throat tightened. "She used to work for me. A long time ago. She was important." Rosa studied him for a moment more, then softened. "She never talks about her past. Never asks for anything. Volunteers sometimes. Always polite. Always leaves before nightfall." Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. Rosa touched his arm gently. "If you want to speak with her, I won't stop you. But please, don't embarrass her. She's proud." "I won't," he whispered. But he didn't speak to her. Not that day. Not yet. Keanu stepped outside into the soft morning light, the shelter door closing gently behind him. The city around him was beginning to stir. A delivery truck idled nearby. Somewhere down the street, someone was sweeping a sidewalk. But for him, everything felt frozen. He leaned against a cold lamppost and stared at the sidewalk, trying to understand what he had just seen. Maggie Steele, the woman who had once held his world together when he was falling apart, was now walking to soup kitchens, scribbling in the corners of shelters, sleeping God knows where. It felt like a nightmare, playing out in slow motion. He remembered the way she used to arrive 15 minutes early, every single day, with 2 coffees. One for him, one for herself. She never let chaos touch him. She had been the wall between him and the storms, and now she was the one weathering them. Why hadn't she called? Why hadn't she told him? He could still hear her voice from those years, the calm authority when the media swarmed after his sister's diagnosis, the soft strength when he refused projects, choosing instead to stay by his sister's side. Maggie had rearranged entire production schedules so he could quietly visit the hospital without press attention. She had stood like a shield in front of him and never once asked for thanks. Now she was in need, and she hadn't asked anyone. Keanu found a bench nearby and sat down, elbows on his knees. He stared at the concrete beneath his boots. He had sent her Christmas cards for a few years after she left. A handwritten note every time, sometimes flowers. Once a large check, discreetly delivered through a friend. She sent it back, with a note that simply said, "Thank you, but I need to stand on my own." That was Maggie, proud, fiercely independent, a fortress of quiet strength. Rosa's words echoed in his mind. She never asks for anything, she's proud. It made sense now. Maggie hadn't disappeared because she was angry or disconnected. She disappeared because she was protecting something. Maybe herself, maybe her family. But at what cost? Keanu rose again and wandered through the nearby streets, not ready to return to the hotel. He passed restaurants just opening their doors, dog walkers chatting over coffee, a few festival staffers carrying gear, but none of it seemed real. All he could think about was Maggie sitting alone on that cold concrete, sipping soup with trembling hands and scribbling in her old notebook like she used to. What had happened in those missing years? Had her husband recovered from that car accident? Had she left to care for him? Did she have children? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker, deeper, that she never shared? He'd never asked. Not really. He'd respected her boundaries, trusted her to take care of herself the way she always had. And maybe that was his mistake. He had believed she was invincible. Now he knew she wasn't. As the wind picked up and leaves scattered down the sidewalk, Keanu made his way back toward the hotel. But he stopped halfway, turned, and retraced his steps until he was once again standing outside the shelter. He didn't go in this time. He simply stood across the street and watched. Through the dusty glass window he saw her, still seated, still reading, still writing in that notebook as if it contained the only structure left in her life. A woman approached Maggie with a tray of muffins. Maggie smiled gently, declined, and kept writing. Keanu felt a wave of helplessness rise inside him. This wasn't just a matter of bad luck or temporary hardship. This was a quiet fall from a world she had once helped him survive. A fall no one had witnessed. Until now. The next day, Keanu returned to the alley just after sunrise. He hadn't slept much. His mind had cycled through every possible memory of Maggie. The film festival felt irrelevant now. The red carpets, the photo ops, the critics' panels. It all faded against the weight of one woman's silence. He stood at the edge of the alley, keeping to the shadows. There she was again, in the same place. A little more hunched over than before, a new scarf wrapped around her neck, likely donated. She held the soup carton with two hands, warming them before taking slow sips. She still didn't recognize him. Or maybe she did and was choosing to look through him, past him, beyond him. He watched as she pulled the small notebook from her coat pocket. The same kind she always used. Brown leather, worn corners. She flipped it open like muscle memory, and the pen appeared from her sleeve as if by magic. She wrote a few lines, paused, looked up at the clouds, then wrote more. Keanu stepped back and took the long way around the block. His heart ached, but he needed answers before approaching her. He made his way to the shelter again. This time, Rosa met him at the door. She greeted him with a quiet nod, her eyes kind but tired. She motioned for him to come in, then led him to a small office off the hallway. "She's still not ready to talk," Rosa said, closing the door softly. "But I can tell you what I know." Keanu sat across from her, hands folded. Rosa continued, "Her name here is Mary. She came about a year ago. Before that, she was living in her car, parked near the beach, but it got towed after unpaid tickets. She lost everything, started bouncing between shelters. Sometimes we wouldn't see her for weeks. Then she'd come back, thin, sick, quieter than before." Keanu stared at the floor. "Did she say why she left her old life?" Rosa sighed. "She mentioned losing someone, I think her husband. She never talks about it directly, but the pain's written all over her." He swallowed hard. "She used to be someone who kept everything running, for everyone, including me." "I believe it," Rosa said softly. "She's still the one people go to when they're scared, even here. She organizes the pantry on her own. She writes lists of who needs extra blankets. She tells stories to the kids when their parents are out looking for work." Keanu nodded slowly, trying to breathe past the knot in his chest. "She never asked for help," Rosa added, "not once." He stood up, thanking her quietly. But before he left, Rosa touched his arm. "If you do talk to her, go gently. She carries more than you can see." Keanu nodded again, stepped into the sunlight, and watched as Maggie, or Mary, walked slowly toward the park bench across the street. He followed at a distance, not ready to speak. But this time, he wouldn't walk away. Keanu stood in his home office. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the hardwood floor. He held his phone to his ear, waiting as the line connected. The silence on the other end gave him a moment to breathe. His thoughts were scattered, still heavy from what he had seen the previous day. "Hey, Alex," he said finally, his voice low. "I need you to find every document, note, or file we have from Maggie Steele's time with us. Everything. Hard copies, digital backups. If it's got her name on it, I want it." There was a pause. Then Alex replied, his voice puzzled but professional. "Absolutely. Any particular reason?" Keanu hesitated. "I saw her yesterday," he said. "She didn't see me. She was behind the Lyric Hotel, eating soup near a dumpster. I followed her to a shelter. She's going by the name Mary." Alex didn't say anything for a beat. Then, quietly, "I'll be there in an hour." True to his word, Alex arrived with 2 boxes, one of digital files printed out from archives, and another with older materials Maggie had left behind when she departed. As they sifted through the contents together, Keanu's memory felt like a camera reel, replaying moments in bursts, the way Maggie used to cross out calendar events in red, how she had a quiet code for keeping paparazzi away, and how she always carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere she went. The second box was mostly filled with old itineraries, signed contracts, magazine scans, and gift cards she never used. But beneath it all, tucked into a manila folder with a faded paperclip, Keanu found something else. An envelope addressed in Maggie's handwriting. It had his name written across the front in soft blue ink. The date in the corner was from 2012. His hands paused. He opened the envelope with care. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Maggie's handwriting was neat, exact. She had always written like a bookkeeper. Precise, no wasted space. If I disappear, it's because I had no choice. There was more. Photocopies of what looked like legal documents. A court petition, medical filings, an insurance rejection. The name Thomas Steele appeared again and again. Alex leaned in to look. "That's her husband, right?" Keanu nodded slowly. "He had an accident. But I never knew the details. She never talked about it." One page stood out. A formal letter from an insurance provider denying coverage for a long-term care facility, citing sufficient proof of rehabilitation need. Another listed foreclosure proceedings on a house in Glendale. There were no photos, no personal notes. Just a quiet paper trail of a life slipping apart. Keanu looked down at the envelope again. Something about that note. "If I disappear, it's because I had no choice." Stuck to his ribs like a weight. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back years through his archived voicemails and messages. Most were long deleted, but there was one that had stayed, pinned in his inbox. It was dated December 2013, just a few days after Maggie had officially left. "Hi, Keanu. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I don't know if I'll be reachable for a while. Please, don't worry. I just need to take care of some things that have waited too long." It had sounded like closure then, but now it read like something else. Keanu sat on the edge of the couch, the letter still in his hand, staring at nothing. The air felt thick, not just with memory, but with guilt. All those years, all the birthdays she'd worked through, the hospital visits she arranged, the silent strength she offered. And not once had he asked her what she needed. Not really. Alex cleared his throat gently. "There's more in the folder," he said. Keanu nodded and reached in again. Another slip of paper slid out, this one torn from a notebook, jagged on one side. It was written in the same blue ink. "Some stories are too heavy to tell, but if someone ever asks, tell them, I never stopped trying." Beneath the sentence, a name. Dr. Felton Marks, orthopedic surgeon, Cedars-Sinai. Keanu reached for his laptop and searched the name. The results loaded slowly, as if weighed down by the past. Dr. Marks had indeed worked at Cedars-Sinai and had retired in 2014, shortly after Maggie's departure. There was a medical review about a controversial spinal procedure. A patient had been injured during post-op therapy. The case was eventually dropped, settled quietly out of court. No names were listed. Alex frowned, reading over Keanu's shoulder. "You think Thomas was the patient?" "I don't think," Keanu said quietly. "I know." The puzzle was coming together, but the picture was still blurry. Maggie had left everything, her job, her home, her community, to care for her husband after the failed surgery. And when the system failed her, she disappeared. Not to run, but to survive. Keanu leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "She gave me her best years, and I sent her flowers when she quit." "You offered help," Alex said. "She said no," Keanu replied. "But I should have seen past it." There was a knock on the door. One of Keanu's house staff handed him a thin package. A padded envelope that had been tucked away in storage, marked with Maggie's handwriting and labeled, "Return to KR only if unopened." He opened it slowly. Inside was an old photograph of Keanu and Maggie standing outside a children's hospital, both smiling, both younger. Behind the photo, another note. "You once told me that every life you touch should feel like a circle, not a line. I tried to live that way too, but some circles break. If I don't make it back, thank you for letting me be part of yours." Keanu felt something in his throat tighten. His hands clenched, not from anger but sorrow. This wasn't just about loyalty. This was about the way people fall through the cracks. Even the strongest. Even the ones who never complained. He stood up abruptly. "I need to find her family. Her real name is Maggie Steele. Somewhere, someone knows what happened after she left. I want to know who let this happen, and why." Alex was already scrolling through a list on his tablet. "She had a brother in Portland. He signed as a co-sponsor on some old paperwork. That's our next lead." Keanu nodded. "Let's get to work." Outside, the city kept moving. But inside that quiet house, something had shifted. A debt had awakened. One written not in numbers, but in loyalty, silence, and the years they both carried like shadowed stones. The drive to the address in Portland took several hours, but Keanu didn't mind the silence. He preferred it. It gave him space to think, space to remember. Every mile seemed to peel back another memory. Maggie at the kitchen counter during long shoots. Maggie quietly reviewing scripts while the world outside buzzed with paparazzi. Maggie placing a hand on his shoulder the day his sister's cancer came back. The house they pulled up to was small, modest, and faded by time. A cracked walkway led to a porch where wind chimes sang to the breeze. A man stepped outside, holding a mug of coffee, and blinked in disbelief when he saw who was walking up his driveway. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu nodded gently. "You must be Michael, Maggie's brother." Michael hesitated, then slowly extended his hand. "I haven't heard her name in almost a year. She stopped calling, no return address, just gone." Inside, the living room was warm, cluttered with books and photos. Michael motioned toward the couch. "I always thought someone would come asking, eventually." Keanu said, "I think she didn't want anyone to worry." Michael's face softened. That was her way. After the accident, she held everything together for years, cared for Thomas around the clock. She sold their house to pay legal fees, refused charity, wouldn't even let me visit much. Said he didn't want to be seen like that. Keanu's voice was quiet. "What exactly happened?" Michael set his mug down. "Thomas had surgery on his spine. Something went wrong during recovery. It left him paralyzed. Maggie fought for him, filed reports, appealed to the hospital board, tried everything. But they ran into walls. They lost savings, then the car, then the apartment. Eventually, she stopped answering calls. Last I heard, she was living out of her van." Keanu looked down. "She told me it was for family reasons. She made it sound temporary and didn't want pity. And frankly, she was afraid of what people would think. Especially after Thomas passed. She felt like she'd failed him." There was a long pause. Keanu took the envelope out of his coat. "She left me this. I think it was a goodbye." Michael's eyes filled. "She must have really trusted you." Keanu's voice cracked slightly. "I trusted her with everything, and I never asked what she needed in return." Michael got up and retrieved a faded folder. "She left this with me. Told me if anything ever happened to her and someone came looking, to give it to them." Inside were more documents. Photos of Thomas before and after his injury, letters Maggie had written to various agencies and lawyers, and a journal page titled "Days I Almost Quit." Keanu read it in silence. One line stood out like a wound. "Pain isn't the worst part, it's being invisible." When they parted, Michael put a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "If you find her, tell her it's okay to come home." Keanu nodded. "I will." As he walked back to the car, he clutched the journal page in his hand. The woman by the dumpster wasn't a stranger. She was someone who once held his world together, while hers was quietly falling apart. Now it was his turn to return that grace, no matter what it took. The name came from an old file, faintly scribbled in the margins of a contact sheet Maggie had filled out years ago. Liam Steele, emergency only. Keanu stared at it for a long time before dialing the number. The line rang 6 times before a voice finally answered. It was cautious, clipped, young but tired. "Yeah," Keanu hesitated. "Is this Liam? Liam Steele?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Keanu. I worked with your mom a while ago." There was a pause, a deep one. Then, "She doesn't talk about that part of her life anymore." "I understand," Keanu said gently. "But I saw her recently, and I just want to help." Another silence, then a sigh. "She's okay?" Keanu nodded, forgetting for a moment that the gesture wouldn't carry over a phone line. "She's alive. I saw her near a shelter downtown. She didn't recognize me." Liam's voice cracked slightly. "Yeah, that tracks." Keanu asked if they could meet. It took some coaxing, but eventually Liam gave him an address. Not a house, but a cramped apartment above a repair shop in an older neighborhood in East Hollywood. Keanu drove there himself. No driver, no team, just him and his thoughts pressing hard against the windshield. The apartment building was worn but clean. Second floor. He knocked on the faded green door, and it opened a sliver. A young man with sunken eyes and shaggy hair peered out, his expression wary. He looked like he hadn't slept well in months. "Keanu Reeves," he said flatly. "Ha." Keanu offered a small smile. "Mind if we talk?" Inside, the apartment was modest. Small kitchen, a couch patched with duct tape, and in the corner, in a motorized chair that barely fit the narrow living room, sat a man in his 50s. His head was tilted slightly to the left, body rigid, one hand twitching occasionally on the armrest. He looked toward Keanu but didn't speak. "My dad, Thomas," Liam said. "Warehouse accident 6 years ago. He's been like this ever since." Keanu's throat tightened. He took a seat, not wanting to loom. "She didn't tell me," he said quietly. "She wouldn't," Liam replied, pulling up a chair across from him. "That's not who she is." They sat there for a moment in the sound of the refrigerator humming, and a distant siren outside. Then Liam got up, walked to a drawer, and returned with a folder. Battered, thick, and spilling with printed emails and stamped envelopes. "Pacifica Corps," Liam said, laying the folder down. "They owned the warehouse where my dad worked. One of their forklifts malfunctioned, dropped a pallet of industrial piping. My dad never walked again." Keanu slowly opened the folder, flipping through pages of reports, formal denials, medical assessments, words like negligence, liability dispute, employee fault. It felt like ice on his skin. "Gambler? They claimed he violated safety protocol," Liam said. "Said he bypassed a lockout system. He didn't. But they buried it. Legal muscle. Their word against ours." Keanu looked up. "And your mom tried to fight it?" Liam nodded. "She spent 2 years pushing back. Lawyers, court filings, debt piled up. She lost the house, lost the car, took out everything to keep us going." Keanu whispered. "She never told me." He wouldn't. She was proud. She still is. He looked over at his father. But the price she paid, it broke her. Liam leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the man in the motorized chair across the room. "After she lost the appeal, she sold everything we had to keep Dad on private care. It wasn't even enough. She worked temp jobs, cleaned offices at night. Sometimes I'd wake up and find her passed out at the kitchen table, still in her uniform. Keanu sat quietly, absorbing every word. He saw now what he'd never noticed before. Maggie had always looked polished, precise, but there were times she'd shown up a little too early, left a little too late. She had hidden more than just exhaustion. She'd hidden war wounds. She left in 2013, Keanu said softly. Told me it was for family reasons. I asked if I could help. She said no. She didn't want charity, Liam muttered. She'd say, I don't want to be someone's burden, even when she was crumbling. Keanu looked down at the folder again. It felt heavier than it had minutes ago. Liam rubbed his hands together, voice lowering. After she left working with you, things got worse. She tried starting over. Got a part-time job as a hospital admin. That helped for a while. But then they repossessed the car. Thomas needed transport. She sold her wedding ring. Then I started missing school to help take care of Dad. She hated that. Keanu blinked. That's when she left? Liam nodded. She sent me down one night, told me I had to finish college no matter what. Said I wouldn't be any help to her if I gave up my future for hers. He swallowed. She disappeared the next morning, just left a note. Keanu's heart clenched. What did it say? It said, be the man your father can be proud of, not the one who stayed stuck with me. Silence filled the room again, heavier than before. Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady but quiet. She's not a burden. She is one of the strongest people I've ever known. I wouldn't have made it through those years without her. Liam studied him. Then why didn't you look for her sooner? The question hit like a punch to the ribs. Keanu looked down at his hands. I thought she was okay. She kept in touch for a little while. Holiday cards, thank you notes. Then one day they just stopped. I thought maybe she was just ready to move on. Liam nodded slowly. She didn't want you to know. He's been on the street for over a year, Keanu said, the words sharp in his throat. Yeah, Liam said. Her last apartment wouldn't renew her lease. Too many late payments. She lived in the car for a while until it got towed. After that, shelters, back alleys. Keanu gripped the folder tighter. This company, Pacifica Corps, they ruined everything. Liam shrugged. They're untouchable. Global logistics, private legal armies. My mom tried going public once, but they buried her with NDAs and threats. Said if she made trouble, they'd come after her for defamation. She backed off, for my sake. Keanu shook his head. No more backing off. Liam raised an eyebrow. You think you can fix this? Keanu looked him straight in the eyes. I have to try. Liam stood and walked to the door. He opened it, but didn't motion for Keanu to leave. You don't know her anymore, he said, his voice quieter. She's not the woman you remember. Keanu stood, feeling the full weight of what that meant. She doesn't trust people, Liam continued. Not even me sometimes. She carries everything alone. If she finds out you've been looking into this, she might disappear again. She's good at that. Keanu stepped into the doorway but paused before crossing the threshold. What if I just talked to her? Liam tilted his head. You think you can convince her to let you in after all this time? I don't know, Keanu admitted. But I can't walk away again. There was a long pause before Liam spoke. She comes by sometimes to leave groceries at the door. Never knocks, just walks away. Keanu's heart twisted at the image. She thinks I don't notice, Liam said, but I always do. Keanu looked at him one more time. Will you tell her I was here? Liam considered it, then shook his head. No, but if she comes by again, and I think she might, I'll leave the door unlocked. It wasn't permission, it was a threat. Keanu nodded once, grateful. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard Liam's voice behind him. Just don't try to fix her. That's not what she needs. Keanu didn't turn around. "I'm not here to fix her. I'm here to finally listen." He walked down the narrow hallway, past peeling paint and the hum of old ceiling fans, each step echoing with memories that refused to fade. Some debts were measured in money, others in silence endured far too long. Keanu sat quietly across from Jordan Wells, the sharp-eyed attorney who had once helped him navigate a labyrinth of international contracts. But this wasn't about films or deals. This was personal. Jordan leaned back, hands folded, as Keanu slid the folder across the polished table. "Everything I've found points to Pacifica Corps," Keanu said. "Maggie's husband was hurt at one of their warehouses. She fought them, and then she vanished." Jordan flipped through the documents, old workers' comp forms, emails, faded court filings. One form stood out, a stamped denial from a case filed in 2014, barely legible beneath the creases. "This isn't surprising," Jordan said. "Pacifica Corps doesn't just play hardball, they rewrite the rules. Let me run a deeper background check on the case and the legal reps involved." Later that day, Jordan called him back with news that landed like a gut punch. The case was sealed, completely sealed, Jordan explained. No public record of proceedings, no outcome, not even a court docket. That usually means a settlement was forced or the court granted a corporate suppression request. Keanu's chest tightened. "She never said a word. Why wouldn't she tell me?" Jordan hesitated. Because she was up against Ryder Caldwell. The name stopped Keanu cold. Caldwell was notorious in the legal world, a corporate assassin in tailored suits, known for dragging cases until a plaintiff either went bankrupt or gave up. In some circles, he was known as the guillotine. He didn't just win, he crushed. Keanu stared down at the envelope again. The pieces were coming together, but the picture was ugly. Maggie had fought alone, and she had lost more than just a court case. Keanu couldn't shake the thought of Maggie walking into a courtroom, probably in a modest dress she wore to his premieres, facing a team of cold, suited professionals who were paid to bury her voice. He asked Jordan to dig deeper, especially into Caldwell. Jordan delivered. There were 3 separate threats of counter-litigation, Jordan said, laying out the timeline. Maggie's suit was filed. Then Pacifica Corps responded with intimidation, accusing her of defamation, insurance fraud, even conspiracy. All bluffs, but legally intimidating enough to make most people back down. Keanu's fist tightened. "And she didn't tell me." "She probably thought telling you would drag you into it. Publicly. That your name would be pulled into the headlines. Keanu Reeves, assistant sues billion-dollar firm. You were already in the press nonstop back then." Keanu leaned back, his thoughts drifting to 2014. That year had been a blur of film sets, promotional tours, and intense media speculation. But somewhere in the background, Maggie had been fighting a war. Alone. He remembered her applying for an emergency assistance grant from the Motion Picture Relief Fund. At the time, he had signed some letter of recommendation for someone, but didn't connect the dots. Jordan had tracked down the denial notice. It was brief and clinical. Application denied. Applicant does not meet industry qualifications. Position held deemed non-essential to production. Keanu stared at the paper. Non-essential? Maggie had coordinated his entire transition into smaller, character-driven roles. She had built his calendar with surgical precision. She had kept him sane. He looked at Jordan. "She gave up her career for me, for her husband, for her son." Jordan nodded quietly, and she was erased. They both sat in silence for a long moment. Keanu thought back to the last note Maggie had left him, a handwritten card tucked into his jacket pocket after her final day. He hadn't really read it since. He found it that evening, buried in a small keepsake box he hadn't opened in years. The ink was slightly smudged, but the words were unmistakably hers. Thank you for the years that reminded me people could be kind. If I step away, it's only because I must. Please remember I always believed in your light, even when you doubted it yourself. Keanu pressed the card to his chest. He had missed the signs, all of them. The next morning, Keanu walked into Jordan's office with a different energy. Not fury, not sorrow, resolve. Do we know where Caldwell is now? Jordan nodded. Still practicing, bigger than ever. He's the go-to fixer for most Fortune 500s when they want to make problems disappear. And Pacifica Core? Untouchable, at least on the surface. But if we tie their pattern of suppression to Maggie's case, we might get the press to look again. Keanu shook his head. No press, not yet. Jordan looked up. Then, what are we doing? Keanu slid a thumb drive across the desk. These are voice notes Maggie left in her notebook. Rosa gave me a few pages she forgot to toss. Some of it's legal strategy, some of it's just her grief. We'll use it to reopen her case quietly. Jordan's eyebrows lifted. That'll take leverage? I'll get leverage. Jordan hesitated. You sure you want to put yourself in this? She didn't want to involve me back then. But now I know. That changes everything. The weight in the room shifted. Jordan leaned back, thinking. We'll need to track down others who may have been silenced by Caldwell. Victims of legal bullying. Whistleblowers. If we find a pattern, we can force discovery. Then start now. By the time Keanu left the office, his mind was already racing ahead. He had spent decades avoiding the political side of Hollywood, the backroom deals, the hidden threats. But this wasn't about image anymore. It was about a woman who gave up everything so no one else would be dragged down with her. Maggie had once told him in passing, sometimes silence is louder than screaming. He hadn't understood it then. He did now. He drove past the alleyway that night, where she had once eaten her soup quietly beneath the dull glow of a streetlight. She wasn't there anymore. But he saw her notebook again in his mind, lined with bullet points, timestamps, red ink underlining one word: protect. It had been her mission for years. Now, it was his. He wouldn't stop until the silence was broken. The morning air was gray with fog when Keanu returned to the shelter. He didn't bring an entourage. He wore no sunglasses or baseball cap to hide his face, just a simple jacket and quiet steps. The staff at the front desk gave him a small nod of recognition but said nothing. He was grateful for that. What he needed today wasn't attention. It was courage. He spotted her in the corner of the main room. Maggie. Or rather, Mary, as everyone here knew her. She was alone at a table by the window, eating slowly from a foam bowl of oatmeal, a steaming paper cup beside her. Her notebook was open, pencil moving in short strokes. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, and her coat sleeves were frayed at the edges. But the way she sat, straight-backed, alert, was unmistakable. She hadn't lost that part of herself. Keanu waited a moment, then he walked toward her. When Maggie looked up and saw him, the pencil fell from her fingers. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Finally, she found her voice. "Keanu?" she said, quietly, as if afraid to say it too loud. He gave a small nod and sat down across from her. She stared, wide-eyed, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Her hand hovered near the notebook but didn't touch it. Her breath was shallow, like she was trying to steady herself. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said at last, her voice tight. "I'm here because I did," Keanu replied. "Because I needed to." She shook her head. "This isn't how you remember me." "I know that. I remember someone who showed up every day," he said, "even when she was hurting." A faint smile flickered across her face, then disappeared. "I'm surviving, that's all." Keanu looked at the bowl of oatmeal, the chipped plastic spoon, the notebook. You're not just surviving, you're still writing." Her hand closed over the notebook protectively. "Some things don't go away," she murmured. "It's all I've got left." There was silence between them for a moment, the hum of breakfast noise filling the gap. Then Maggie leaned in slightly. "Please don't try to fix this," she said. "I made my peace with where I am." "I haven't," Keanu replied gently. "I don't need rescuing." "I know," he said. "But maybe you need reminding that you mattered, that you still do." Her eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She folded her hands in her lap and straightened her back. "Let me fade with dignity," she whispered. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He didn't say anything. He just placed it on the table between them and stood to leave. She looked at it but didn't pick it up. As he walked away, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Faded, a little bent at the corner. It showed the two of them on a film set in 2010. She was holding a clipboard and laughing. He had his arm around her shoulder, mid-sentence, probably cracking a joke. On the back of the photo, written in Keanu's handwriting, were 9 simple words. "You didn't let me fall then. I won't let you fall now." Maggie stared at the photograph for a long time. Her fingers trembled as she held it, the edges soft from time and wear. That day, she remembered it clearly. It was blistering hot on set. Keanu had been running scenes in a leather jacket, drenched in sweat but still smiling. She had made some snarky comment about his refusal to take a break, and he had pulled her into the frame just before the shot was taken. She had laughed. Not because she felt light, but because he did, and for one brief moment, she had borrowed that lightness. Now the photo burned in her hand. The words on the back echoed, too loud. "You didn't let me fall then, I won't let you fall now." Her throat tightened. She folded the photo and tucked it carefully into her notebook, pressing the cover closed with both hands. The shelter director, Rosa, passed by and glanced at her. "You okay, Mary?" Maggie nodded, unable to speak. Rosa eyed her for another moment, then moved on. Maggie rose slowly, walked outside, and sat down on the cracked stone steps behind the shelter. The alley buzzed faintly with the hum of nearby traffic, but all she heard was her own pulse. She hadn't seen Keanu in over a decade. She'd watched him from afar, on the screen, in interviews, on magazine covers, but from behind a wall she'd had built brick by brick. She had chosen to leave, not because she didn't care, but because she did. Too much. If she had stayed, she would have burdened him with her unraveling life. She remembered every moment. Thomas lying still in a hospital bed, Liam barely a teenager, and bills stacking faster than she could open them. No insurance, no payout. Just silence from Pacifica Corps and a maze of legal indifference. And yet she had never told Keanu the full story. Not when he offered help, not when he sent gifts. She had always said the same thing. "We're okay. Just some things to sort out." She hadn't wanted pity. She hadn't wanted him to see her strength unravel. But now he had. A door creaked behind her. She didn't turn, but she heard footsteps approach. Slow. Careful. Rosa sat beside her, holding 2 steaming paper cups. She handed one to Maggie without a word. Maggie took it and held it close. The warmth seeped into her fingers. "He shouldn't have come." "Helm came because he still sees you," Rosa said softly. "That's the problem." Rosa waited, sipping her tea. Maggie stared ahead. "You know," Rosa said, "in all my years here I've seen 2 kinds of people. The ones who disappear and never come back, and the ones who fight not to be forgotten." "I was both," Maggie said. "I disappeared, and I fought, but I did it quietly, maybe too quietly." Rosa nodded. "He gave you a lifeline." Maggie didn't respond. Her eyes drifted toward the sky, where morning sun pushed against the mist. "He always had a way of showing up when no one else did." Rosa smiled. Sounds like he still does. Later that evening, after most of the residents had settled into their routines, Maggie sat alone in the common room. The shelter lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long, soft shadows on the faded walls. Her notebook lay open beside her, but the pen had not moved for hours. She kept rereading the message on the back of that photo, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. Every word felt like a thread tugging at something she had buried deep. That version of herself, capable, trusted, and vital, felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone who had vanished the day she signed the last legal form and walked out of the courthouse with nothing left but silence. She hadn't cried in months. Not when her car was towed, not when she slept through 2 winter nights in the alley behind a soup kitchen. Not even when she watched Liam work 16-hour days just to hold their father's care together. But now, in the presence of a single gesture, a photo, a line of handwriting, her throat thickened with emotion. She stood suddenly, trying to outrun it. She paced the hallway, willing herself not to feel. Outside, a familiar figure appeared under the yellow glow of the street lamp. Keanu hadn't left town. He didn't approach the shelter. He just stood across the street, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed, as if waiting for something that couldn't be rushed. Maggie didn't know why, but she stepped outside. They didn't speak. The cold air wrapped around them as she walked to the sidewalk, crossing slowly until they were standing a few feet apart. Her shoulders were rigid, arms crossed, not in anger but in self-protection. He looked at her gently, not with pity, but with the same quiet intensity she remembered from years ago, when words were rare, but actions loud. "You shouldn't be here," she said, breaking the silence first. "I know. This isn't something you can fix." "I'm not trying to fix it," he replied. "I just don't want to ignore it." She looked away. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because I saw you, and I realized I never really stopped needing you. I just didn't know how much until you disappeared." Her chest tightened. "Keanu, I asked you not to do anything. I'm not here to save you," he said. "I'm here because you mattered to me. You still do." The tears welled before she could stop them, so she turned her face slightly. "I lost everything. But you didn't lose who you are." She shook her head. "Don't make this harder than it already is." He nodded once. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small card. "If you ever want to talk about anything, or nothing, you can use this, no questions, no pressure." She took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. She didn't speak. She just nodded. Keanu gave her a final glance, grateful, steady, and walked back into the darkness. Maggie stood there for a long time, staring down at the card. It was blank on one side. On the other, just a single number. No name, no branding. Just a door left open. She slipped it into her coat, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a door that didn't close. The morning sun crept softly through the thin veil of fog that lingered outside the shelter's narrow windows. Keanu sat in the back seat of a rented sedan, engine running low and steady, watching the entrance with quiet focus. He hadn't planned to return this soon, but something inside him hadn't settled since the visit. Not after the photo. Not after seeing Maggie's eyes flicker with gratitude, then retreat behind that same armor she once used to protect him from the world. He wasn't expecting a knock on the window. Rosa stood outside, her face lined with both exhaustion and care. She didn't speak right away, just held up an old leather briefcase. Worn, scuffed, the kind executives used before tablets and cloud storage. Keanu opened the door and stepped out. "She left this with us a few months ago," Rosa said softly. "Told us to give it away if no one came for it. I thought maybe you should have it." He reached for the handle and nodded, unsure of what to say. Inside the shelter, Keanu took a seat in a quiet corner, away from the soft murmurs of residents settling into their daily routines. He placed the briefcase on the table and slowly unlatched the clasps. The hinges creaked, stiff from age. A waft of dust and old paper filled the air. It was all there: receipts, folded appointment notes, meal vouchers, shelter intake forms. Tucked in one corner was a bundle of envelopes wrapped in a rubber band. One envelope was different. It had Liam's name written in Maggie's elegant, unmistakable cursive. No stamp, no date, just his name, and a weight behind the ink that made Keanu pause. He hesitated before opening it, feeling the thin edge of paper between his fingers. Part of him wanted to protect her privacy. The other part knew this letter might be the last piece of the puzzle, the one explanation she never gave aloud. He unfolded the single page and began to read. "Liam, if you ever find this, it means the storm has passed, and I've failed to say what I should have said face to face. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I left not because I didn't love you or Dad. I left because staying would have destroyed someone else, someone who once saved me. Back when your father was hurt and I filed the suit against Pacifica Corps, things escalated fast, too fast. They found out I had pulled internal documents. I didn't steal them. I copied what was in plain sight. But they didn't care. They found my name in company databases and threatened to bring Keanu down with me. They said I had used his name to gain access. They said if I didn't withdraw, they'd leak everything, paint him as part of some scheme. So I stepped away." Keanu's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading the letter. Each word felt like a confession, wrapped in pain, laced with quiet courage. Maggie's handwriting had started to waver part-way through, the letters slightly more uneven. I knew what they were doing. It wasn't just about the lawsuit. It was about silencing me. And if they couldn't ruin me financially, they'd do it by wrecking the reputation of the one person who always treated me with respect. They knew Keanu would never fight back publicly. He's too quiet for that kind of war. They knew a scandal would bury him deeper than any lie. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. He gave me a life when I was falling apart. He gave me purpose, structure, grace. So I made a choice. I stepped out. I let the story go cold. I let people think I moved on for family reasons. Even you." Keanu lowered the letter and exhaled. The weight in his chest didn't lift. It pressed harder. The timeline made perfect sense now. That slow fade Maggie orchestrated, the way she'd quietly untangled herself from his schedule, turned down bonuses, started avoiding events. He had read it as burnout, but it was a calculated retreat. A self-imposed exile meant to shield him from a fire he never saw coming. He looked back down at the paper, at the final paragraphs written in ink that had slightly bled through from the pressure of the pen. "You were only 17 then, Liam. You had college dreams, and I didn't want to take that from you. You already carried too much, so I let you think I was strong enough to carry it all. I wasn't. I sold the house before it went into foreclosure, paid off what I could of your dad's medical bills, lived in the car until the engine finally gave up. I told myself it would be temporary, that something would turn around, but the years kept slipping by. And I didn't want pity, not from you, not from Keanu, not from anyone. So if this reaches you, I hope it does so in a time when you've found your peace. I never stopped being proud of you, never stopped believing in who you could be, and no matter how far I've fallen, that belief was always the one thing I kept. Love always." Keanu set the letter down slowly, letting it rest flat on the table. There was silence in the room, but it wasn't empty. It echoed with every unspoken apology, every sacrifice she had folded into her silence. He folded the letter carefully, with reverence. There was no drama in his expression, just a quiet resolve forming behind his eyes. This wasn't just about helping her anymore. It was about giving back the truth she had buried, the voice she'd silenced to protect others. She had been willing to lose everything to shield him. Now it was his turn. He slipped the letter into a plain folder, tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, and stood up. Rosa was near the kitchen, sorting canned goods with 2 volunteers. Keanu approached her quietly. "I need to talk to someone," he said, his voice low. Rosa turned. "Of course. Who?" Keanu looked toward the hallway where Maggie had last been seen the day before. Her, but not as myself, not yet. Keanu didn't return to the shelter the next morning. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with Alex, going over every detail of what they had so far. Maggie's silence wasn't a retreat. It had been a deliberate stand, one she never wanted credit for, one that had cost her everything. "She protected you," Alex said softly, "and she never told anyone." Keanu nodded. "She gave me 8 years, and then another 10 of silence." They made a list: names, contacts, leverage points. Keanu's lawyer had already found more details about Pacific Accor's tactics. There had been other whistleblowers over the years, but none who stuck. Ryder Caldwell, the corporate attorney who crushed Maggie's case, had risen in the company. He was now their chief legal strategist, praised for his risk management. It made Keanu sick to think about it. Alex slid a folder across the table. "There's a podcast host, Marla Jennings, investigative journalist, leans into social justice cases. She covered the 2017 warehouse collapse in Fresno. She might listen." Keanu picked it up and stared at the name. "Reach out, quietly, and send her the letter." Alex blinked. "The one to Liam?" "No, the one to the world." He opened his notebook, flipped to the page where he had begun writing early that morning. A simple statement of facts. Maggie's name, the company, the timeline. The letter she never sent, quoted directly. He would speak through his actions, the way she had spoken through her silence. By mid-afternoon, Keanu walked alone through a quiet street not far from the shelter. He carried a bag with fresh socks, travel toiletries, and 2 thermoses, coffee and soup. Not because she needed saving, but because someone should have seen her long before now, because someone should have honored what she carried. At the corner, he saw Rosa waving him down. She held up something wrapped in soft cloth. Maggie's notebook. "She left this behind last night. Didn't say a word, just walked out after dinner and handed it to me." Keanu took it gently. "Do you know where she went?" "Back to the bus stop, but I think she's just walking. She does that when she's overwhelmed." He nodded. "Thank you, Rosa." As he turned the pages of the notebook, he saw no to-do lists, no schedules. It was filled with small reflections. Dates, memories, questions. In the corner of one page, in tiny handwriting, was a line: "If one person remembers me for something other than falling, maybe that's enough." Keanu closed the notebook, held it to his chest, and looked up toward the overcast sky. "They won't disappear," he whispered. "Not this time." He didn't need to say anything more. The wind picked up slightly, and as it did, Keanu walked slowly toward the road, the notebook pressed to his heart. This was no longer just a reunion. It was a promise in motion. The rain came down in a quiet drizzle, coating the windows of Keanu's private office in a soft gray sheen. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Around the long wooden table sat 4 people. Jordan Wells, Keanu's trusted legal counsel, Alex, his assistant, a private investigator named Theo Harlan, and across from them, Diane Morgan, a retired investigative journalist with a reputation for chasing truth, no matter the cost. Diane, in her late 60s, had wiry gray hair pulled into a tight bun and a voice that carried the weight of decades spent exposing corruption. She flipped open a manila folder and laid down 3 photographs. These were all warehouse workers at different Pacifica Corps facilities. Different states, different years, but the injuries, the stories, they line up. Keanu leaned forward. "Show me." Diane pointed. "This one's from 2011. Herniated discs from a failed harness. The report said worker error, but I tracked down the safety report. The harness was already flagged defective. Pacifica Corps settled quietly." She moved to the next. "A for forklift. Crushed this man's leg in 2015. Protocols said no operators were to drive after 10-hour shifts. His logs show 12 hours on duty. Again, settlement, no press." Theo added quietly, "We've uncovered at least 9 cases since 2008 where Pacifica Corps appears to have buried liability. NDAs. Private settlements. And the same lawyer keeps popping up." Ryder Caldwell. The name echoed like a bad omen. Keanu sat back, jaw tight. "The same guy who went after Maggie." Jordan nodded. "He's brutal, known for destroying credibility in court. If she had pushed further, he could have dragged your name into it, just like she feared." Keanu stared at the wall. A single framed photo of a mountain lake hung beside him. The stillness of it clashed with the storm brewing in his chest. She gave up everything. For me. Diane closed the folder gently. "Mr. Reeves, I won't lie to you. If you make this public, if you go after Pacifica Corps, they'll retaliate. They have political ties, media leverage, and enough money to drown even the loudest voices." Alex looked up from his laptop. "But we have truth, and that's louder." Diane gave a tight, weathered smile. "Only if someone's willing to shout it." Keanu's voice was quiet, but steady. "We don't spin truth, we reveal it." Silence fell over the room. Not out of fear, but respect. The kind that follows conviction. Diane opened her laptop. The screen filled with spreadsheets, legal records, and redacted employee testimonies. She looked up, her tone calm but grave. "This goes deeper than we thought. I found 9 other incidents involving Pacifica Corps warehouse workers between 2010 and 2016. All men, all blue-collar. Every single one claimed faulty equipment or lack of training. In 6 of those cases, workers ended up permanently disabled." Keanu leaned forward. "What happened to them?" 2 got small settlements and non-disclosure agreements. 3 had their claims denied. 4 just vanished from the record. She clicked a folder open. Here's where it gets sickening. The company's internal language in emails is coded, but clear. They referred to high-risk workers as "written my liabilities." That's not even human language. Keanu's hands were clasped tight. He didn't speak. Jordan glanced at the file. "They're using third-party insurance auditors to rubber-stamp denial letters. Looks like a shell system. They outsource blame, then hide behind contracts." The PI, a grizzled ex-FBI analyst named Barrett, crossed his arms. "It's corporate warfare. They don't break the law cleanly. They bend it so hard it snaps without leaving fingerprints." Alex, who had been quiet, broke the silence. "Why would they go after Maggie?" Diane clicked to another folder. "Because she kept pushing. She subpoenaed forklift maintenance logs, tried to track down a missing repair order, and, this is key, she pulled emails from a night supervisor's account. The ones that mentioned replacing inspection documents with backdated ones, which is why they accused her of theft," Keanu murmured. "They flipped it." Barrett nodded. "Classic intimidation. Turn the whistleblower into the criminal, and then threaten her," Diane added. "Not just legally. There are mentions of her contacting press outlets and a memo saying, 'Contain the story by any means necessary.' She was alone. No legal team, no backup. Just a woman trying to save her family and protect you." A hush fell. Keanu exhaled slowly. then asked, "How much of this can we prove?" Deanne paused. "Enough to start a fire, but not enough to win the war. Unless someone from inside talks." Keanu stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was starting to set behind the hills. His voice was steady, almost too calm. "So, we find someone." Barrett raised an eyebrow. "That's not going to be easy. These people bury their own skeletons under 10 feet of concrete." Keanu turned. "Then we bring the hammer." The next morning, Diane called Keanu with a lead. A former Pacifica Corps night shift supervisor named Wesley Griggs had filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. He was off the grid, but she tracked him down to a mobile home near Reading. He hadn't spoken publicly, but in an old workers' forum, he once posted a cryptic line: "They rewrote the night Thomas fell." Keanu didn't hesitate. Within hours, he was in a rental car, headed north with Alex beside him. The landscape blurred by in streaks of pine and dry hills. Neither of them spoke much. The weight of everything that had come to light sat between them. When they finally arrived, Griggs answered the door shirtless, with a worn look in his eyes, like a man who hadn't slept through the night in a decade. Keanu introduced himself simply. "I'm not here for headlines. I'm here for the truth." Griggs rubbed his jaw, scanning the actor's face. "You were close with Maggie?" "She saved my life more than once," Keanu replied. The door creaked open. Inside, the place was sparse. A couch missing its legs, a TV on a plastic crate, a table with unpaid bills and a dusty fan blowing stale air. Griggs offered no coffee, no pleasantries, just the quiet of a man wrestling with the decision to speak. "I kept my mouth shut back then because I had a mortgage and a daughter in college," he began. "But when Thomas's accident happened, we all knew the lift was overdue for inspection. Management said the logs were clean, but I saw the original ones. Maggie found them too. That's why they came for her." "But why didn't you come forward?" Alex asked gently. Griggs stared at the floor. "Because Pacifica Corps' legal team offered me a choice. Keep my job and shut up, or testify and get buried in lawsuits. I picked wrong anyway. I got laid off 2 years later, no severance. They made me believe silence was safety." Keanu didn't judge him. He just asked, "Would you tell your story now?" Griggs looked at him, eyes bloodshot and haunted. "Only if someone else stands with me. I'm not brave alone." Keanu nodded once. "You won't be." Back in the car, Alex said what they were both thinking. If he testifies, others might come forward too. Keanu didn't respond. He was staring out the window, his mind already moving forward. There was no turning back now. Tomorrow, he would visit Liam again. This time, not as a friend, but as a man preparing for war. The phone rang just after dawn. Keanu picked it up on the first ring. Rosa's voice was tight with worry. "It's Maggie," she said. "She collapsed outside the shelter this morning. We called an ambulance. She's at Westside General now. They say it's a respiratory infection, maybe pneumonia." Keanu sat up in bed, the weight of the words anchoring him. "Did she have symptoms before?" "She's been coughing for weeks," Rosa replied. "But she refused to go to the clinic, said she didn't want to take a spot from someone else, and she knew she didn't have insurance." Keanu didn't answer. He was already pulling on clothes. The hospital was only 20 minutes away, but every red light felt like a delay too long. By the time he arrived, Maggie had been moved to a small isolation room. He could see her through the glass, frail under two thin blankets, pale and trembling, her breaths shallow. A nurse recognized him but said nothing. She just nodded and opened the door quietly. Inside, the beeping machines hummed with steady rhythm, but Maggie looked like a shadow of the woman who once kept his world together. She opened her eyes slowly. Recognition flickered, then faded. Or maybe she didn't want to acknowledge him. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, Her voice was barely audible. "You've done enough." Keanu sat down beside her. "Not even close." She turned her head away, coughing. Her hand gripped the thin blanket. "You paid for this." He's from the sidewalk. "I wasn't going to let you lie on the sidewalk and fight this alone." Her jaw tightened. "I had it under control." "No, you didn't," he said quietly. "And that's okay." Maggie closed her eyes, exhausted. There was no fight left, not today. Her breath rattled a little in her chest. Keanu watched her for a long time, remembering how this same woman once ran his entire life from behind a laptop and a notepad. She had shielded him when his sister Kim was on her last round of chemo. She'd driven him to hospital visits, through back alleys to avoid the press. And now here she was, alone, sick, pretending it was fine. He stepped out and called Alex. "I need someone bedside, someone compassionate. Not press, not PR, just help." Alex responded without hesitation. "Sarah's here in town. She's working nights as a nurse. I'll ask her to go." Sarah arrived within the hour. Gentle, warm, no questions asked. She cleaned Maggie up, arranged for better blankets, adjusted the IV stand. Keanu watched quietly. At one point, Maggie opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," but didn't say who it was meant for. Later that afternoon, Sarah came to him with an idea. Does she have anyone she might want to see, someone familiar? Keanu hesitated. Her husband's paralyzed. Her son's working non-stop, but maybe a video call? Let's try. I can arrange it. The tablet screen flickered to life as Sarah adjusted the angle. Maggie lay propped up slightly, her breathing steadier now, though still shallow. Her eyes remained closed until she heard the sound. Familiar, careful breathing on the other side of the call. "Maggie?" The voice cracked slightly. "It's me. It's Thomas." Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the screen, and her hand reached out, trembling. "Thomas?" she whispered. He was in a reclining chair, head tilted forward, neck muscles visibly straining to stay upright. His face had aged, and the lines were deeper now, but his eyes, those soft, brown eyes, were still hers. "I wanted to see you," he said. "Been a long time." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes. She tried to speak, but choked instead, clutching the blanket at her chest. Sarah quietly stepped out of the room, giving them privacy. "I didn't know if you'd want to," she finally said, barely audible. Thomas gave a weak smile. "Always did. Every day." Maggie shook her head. "I was so scared. When they threatened Keanu, I couldn't risk pulling anyone down with me. And you? You needed Liam more than me, limping through the house like a broken shell." "You were never broken," he replied. "You were trying to hold everything together. Even when I couldn't move, I knew you were out there, still fighting." "I failed," she said. "No," Keanu's voice came from the doorway. "You gave everything." She looked up, eyes red and raw. "You were never supposed to know." "I should have known," he said. "You carried too much, for too long." The call ended quietly, with Thomas smiling and whispering something only Maggie could understand. She held the tablet close for a moment after the screen went dark, as if afraid to let go. Keanu stepped closer. "Let me help, Maggie." She shook her head. "Help someone else, someone who hasn't already burned bridges or lost everything." He crouched beside the bed. "That's not how I work. You helped me when I was numb, lost, angry, when I couldn't face the cameras or the world. You made sure I got to see my sister one last time without flashing lights. You protected what little peace I had left. You sacrificed holidays, skipped birthdays with your son. For me, that was my job," she whispered. "No," he said. "That was love, and now I'm here. Because you mattered. You still do." She didn't respond, only turned her head slightly and let the tears come. silent and free. For the first time in years, someone was staying. Not because they had to, but because they wouldn't leave. Keanu pulled something from his coat pocket, a small card. "I set something up," he said, quietly. "It's a private care plan. You'll have follow-ups, meals, home support if you want it. Sarah's agreed to coordinate. Nothing flashy, no headlines." She stared at the card but didn't touch it. "I'm not doing this because you asked," he added. "I'm doing it because you didn't. And you should have." The room fell quiet. Maggie closed her eyes, clutching the edge of the blanket with frail fingers. "I still don't want a spotlight," she murmured. "You won't get one," Keanu said gently. "Just light, that's all." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin hospital blinds, casting pale golden stripes across the floor. Maggie was awake, sitting upright with a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there the night before. Her breathing had improved. Her skin had regained a hint of warmth. The nurse came in with breakfast and gentle small talk, but Maggie's mind was elsewhere. She looked at the bedside table. The card was still there, untouched, but not unread. Sarah came in with a soft knock, holding a fresh gown and some flowers. She placed them down and offered a smile. "You've got visitors lined up for the week, but only if you're ready." "I'm not used to people waiting on me," Maggie said. "I used to be the one juggling calendars and booking flights." Sarah sat on the edge of the chair near the window. "And now you're the one being carried for a bit. That's okay, you know." Maggie turned toward the window, watching as two sparrows landed on the ledge and chirped to each other. "It feels like I failed, even at surviving." "No," Sarah said. "You fought, quietly, fiercely, and you protected people. That's not failure, that's courage." Just then, the door opened. Keanu stepped in, holding 2 small coffees and a paper bag. "Hope you still take it with cinnamon." Maggie raised a brow. "You remember that?" "Of course. You were the only person on the planet who insisted cinnamon in coffee was non-negotiable." She reached for the cup with slightly shaking hands, the warmth seeping through her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat for a moment in silence, sipping coffee like old coworkers at a cafe. Time temporarily rewound. Keanu looked over at her. "Do you remember the Venice shoot? The time our flight was canceled and you had to reschedule press with 5 countries in 12 hours? Maggie gave a faint laugh. "And I still found time to bring you a clean shirt because yours had a mustard stain the size of a grapefruit." He smiled. "You were unshakable." "I was surviving," she said. "Barely." He nodded and then leaned forward. "You kept showing up when it cost you everything. You gave so much of your life away to make mine easier. I didn't see it all back then, not clearly." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "That's the point of people like me. We're the background." Keanu shook his head. "Not anymore. Not with me." There was a pause. She stared at the wall ahead, her voice almost inaudible. "I was afraid that if I accepted help, I'd never be able to give it again. That I'd lose who I was." Keanu's voice was gentle but steady. "Then let's build something new. From here. Not charity, just care." She closed her eyes and nodded. No words, just the surrender that came when someone finally laid down their armor. He stood, squeezing her hand once. "Rest. Sarah will stay close. So will I." As he stepped into the hallway, Sarah met him with a question in her eyes. "She's not ready to accept everything yet," he said. "But she's not refusing anymore." "That's progress," Sarah said, glancing back toward the door. "She's not alone now." Keanu looked out the hospital window as cars moved below and the city pulsed forward. But in that small room, something had stopped, shifted, reopened. A life worth saving was finally being seen again. The cold came suddenly that week, like a wall of glass shattering across Los Angeles skies. The news warned of record lows and freezing rain, an unusual and dangerous combination for a city unprepared for winter emergencies. Homeless shelters filled beyond capacity. Rosa, the director of the downtown shelter, paced the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear, calling every contact she had. Keanu was in the middle of reviewing legal updates with Diane Morgan when the call came. Rosa's voice was tight with urgency. "The pipes are freezing, Keanu. We have no heat, and we're going to have to evacuate tonight. I have over 60 people in here. I don't know where to send them." He didn't hesitate. "Give me an hour." Within that hour, his assistant Alex had reserved every available room in a small boutique hotel just 6 blocks away. Keanu himself drove to the shelter, stepping inside with boxes of thermal blankets and gloves. Maggie, still recovering from her hospital stay, sat near the front entrance, bundled in a thick sweater, watching the chaos unfold with weary eyes. When she saw him, she tried to rise, but he gently motioned for her to stay seated. "This storm's not taking anyone out on my watch," he said, offering her a bottle of water and a soft smile. "I can help," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse, still weak from the respiratory infection, but her resolve was unshaken. "Rosa needs hands." Rosa protested, but Maggie waved her off and began organizing the packing of supplies: blankets, hygiene kits, food items, just like she used to coordinate film sets and press tours. There was still a quiet command in her presence, a rhythm to the way she made things run smoothly. By dusk, the shelter had been emptied safely. Families with children were prioritized for the hotel rooms. Elderly guests were bundled into warm vans. Keanu opened his own guest house, once used for visiting relatives, to a group of 10, including Maggie, despite her protests. That night, Rosa stood outside the hotel's temporary intake center with Keanu. The light from the lobby cast soft gold across the wet sidewalk. "She's always been the first to help," Rosa said, looking toward the door where Maggie sat with a clipboard, checking in guests. "Even when she had nothing. She's carried people through storms most of us didn't even know were coming." Keanu watched her for a long moment, his hands deep in his coat pockets. She didn't know he had quietly asked Rosa to keep her close, not just out of concern, but because part of him wasn't ready to let her vanish again. Outside the hotel, a freelance blogger with a long camera lens took a photo, then another. A Hollywood actor helping the homeless during a winter storm was bound to draw attention, and it did. By morning, rumors were already circulating online. "Keanu Reeves quietly aids evacuated shelter," one headline read. Another had a photo with a zoomed-in face. Maggie, eyes lowered, a scarf covering part of her jaw. The caption, "Who is the mystery woman?" The questions had started. By mid-morning, Keanu's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News outlets were calling. His publicist left a voicemail urging him to make a formal statement. A few photos had gone viral, none with Maggie's name, but enough to raise suspicion. And Maggie knew it. She sat in the corner of the hotel's makeshift common area, holding a mug of tea someone had brought her. Keanu approached quietly, sat across from her without speaking. She looked up slowly. "You didn't tell them, did you?" Her voice was quiet, like the edge of a ripple in still water. "No, but it's spreading," Keanu replied. "Someone recognized you from a production still. It's not confirmed yet, but it's only a matter of time." Maggie looked away, her expression unreadable. "I told you not to make this about me." "It's not," he said. "But if the storm blew the roof off a lie, maybe it was time for the truth to breathe." She set the mug down, fingers trembling. "I didn't want this. Not attention, not pity. I stayed invisible on purpose." "I know," Keanu said. "And I kept your silence because you asked. But we're in a moment now. You've already become the center of something bigger. People are watching. They want to know what dignity looks like when it stands in the cold and still helps others." She closed her eyes. "Then show them someone else. Don't use me." "I'm not using you," he said. "I'm asking you to lead." That word landed like a stone. Her lips parted slightly, confused. Lead what? Keanu leaned forward. We've already started talking to nonprofits. Diane is lining up people who've filed complaints against Pacifica Corps. The shelter needs funding. The city needs a human face for this story. Someone who lived it and still chose grace. Someone they can't dismiss. Her in shock. I'm not a symbol, she said, shaking her head. You're not, Keanu said. You're a survivor. And you've got more credibility than anyone else I know. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers wrapped around the tea mug again, as if grounding herself. If I say yes, they'll dig. Into my past. Into Thomas. Into everything I gave up to stay silent. I'll be beside you, Keanu said. You protected me for years. It's time I return that. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Why does it have to be me? Because no one else can speak with your voice. A long pause filled the space between them. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. A quote, scribbled in her handwriting from years ago. He recognized it instantly. She had taped it once to his trailer door during a rough week of filming. Where you stand in the storm learns your name, she read aloud. Neither of them said anything after that. That night, Maggie stayed in the guest house behind Keanu's property. It wasn't extravagant, just 2 bedrooms, warm lights, quiet furniture. But it felt like a palace after months of sleeping upright in shelters and park benches. Keanu had stocked the fridge and left fresh clothes on the bed. There was no speech, no charity talk, just warmth. She spent the early hours sorting blankets for the remaining guests still in hotels. She made lists on yellow legal pads and highlighted names like she used to, drawing tiny circles beside unfinished tasks. Some habits never left. Rosa, watching her move about with calm authority, shook her head and smiled. You know, she's always been like this. First to arrive, last to rest. We once had a pipe burst in the shelter. She fixed it with a borrowed wrench and duct tape before maintenance even showed up. Keanu laughed gently. That sounds like her. She won't tell you, Rosa added. But when the shelter ran out of toothpaste last winter, she walked 2 miles in the snow just to bring back travel-sized tubes from a gas station, paid with quarters she kept in a jar. He nodded, watching Maggie through the frosted glass window. She looked like someone rising from the ashes, not because someone else lifted her, but because she knew how to build her own hands into scaffolding. Even now, she wasn't asking for anything. She was giving again. The next morning, a local news van parked outside the shelter. Keanu intercepted them before they made it through the front door. No interviews, he said firmly. Not today. The reporter nodded, but pointed to a printed headline circulating online. Hollywood star rescues unknown woman in shelter, evacuation. The photo showed Keanu carrying bags, Maggie blurred behind him. He took a deep breath. This was the edge of the cliff they'd been trying to avoid. Later, Maggie sat across from him again in the same hotel lounge where they'd first spoken days earlier. She held the newspaper in her lap. I saw it, she said simply. Keanu waited. If I say yes, she continued slowly, if I speak, I want it to be on my terms. No pity, no spotlight, just truth. That's all I ever wanted, he said. She nodded. Then I'll do it. I'll lead the shelter's fundraiser. I'll tell my story to support others. But the focus stays on the cause, not the mess I came from. Keanu smiled. Deal. And one more thing, she added, no red carpets. If I have to speak in public, it'll be in sneakers and a sweater. He chuckled. You'd terrify half of Hollywood. She grinned for the first time in weeks. It softened her, made her look like the woman who once helped him rewrite press statements at midnight with coffee-stained fingers. Outside, the air was still cold, But the sun had broken through the clouds. The shelter would rebuild. The movement had begun, and Maggie Steele, once forgotten by the very system she upheld, was about to become its most powerful voice. Maggie sat quietly in the corner of the sunlit room, her fingers wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. Keanu had invited her to his private office, not the one with the sleek furniture and agents passing through, but the quieter one, tucked away near the back of the property, where the walls were lined with books and soft shadows held the space like a blanket. He spoke gently, leaning forward in the leather chair across from her. "I want to offer you something," he said. "A job. One that builds on everything you've ever stood for." She looked at him, eyes cautious. Her body, still recovering from illness, tensed just enough to signal the emotional wall rising. "It's called the Horizon Project," he continued. "A fund to support people like you, those behind the scenes, who fall through the cracks when life hits too hard." She lowered her gaze. "Keanu, I'm not looking for pity or charity." "It's not charity," he replied. "It's legacy, yours." Her head lifted slightly at that. He held the moment without pushing, just enough for the words to settle. He told her the truth, how he had seen the emergency grant she was denied years ago, how he'd spoken to others who slipped through similar gaps. Writers, stage managers, camera operators, retired stuntmen, all of them broken by the same silence she had endured. "And they need someone who understands," he added. "Someone who's lived it, someone who's walked through it." And kept walking. Maggie said nothing for a long time. Her eyes drifted to the windows, where early light danced in the leaves. She thought of Thomas, of Liam, of every night she'd spent wondering if any of it had meant something. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice soft but unwavering, "but on one condition." Keanu nodded. "Name it." "No red tape," she said. "No boards, no long approval processes. If someone needs help, we help them." He smiled. "And no public credit," she added. "My name stays out of the press." "That one might be harder," he admitted. "But I'll try." She hesitated, then added one more. "And this doesn't stay in Hollywood. We help everyone, from wherever they are." "Especially them," Keanu said. "Especially the ones who think they've been forgotten." They spent the next hour sketching out what it would look like. Quiet grants, emergency housing, medical bills, therapy for burnout. Simple, fast, human support. Run not like a business, but like a vow. Within a week, Keanu and Maggie were deep in coordination. They worked out of a quiet wing of Keanu's home, while his assistant Alex liaised discreetly with donors and legal counsel. Maggie, though still regaining her strength, was methodical. She moved through spreadsheets like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Quiet, precise, but full of purpose. Her eyes lit up with a fire that hadn't been seen in years. Keanu kept the pace gentle, refusing to overwhelm her. But it was clear, this project gave her life again. The fog that had hung over her voice and posture began to lift. Rosa dropped by once, just to bring a box of fresh baked muffins, and was moved to tears watching Maggie work. "She was born for this," Rosa whispered to Keanu as they stood outside the office door. The first phase of the Horizon Project launched quietly. An internal event held in a private auditorium on Keanu's property. Only about 40 people were invited. Each one of them had lived through crisis. Gaffers who'd gone bankrupt after an injury, a wardrobe designer who lost her home in a flood, a production assistant who had battled cancer in silence. Maggie didn't want to speak. At first she'd said no, firmly, gently, the way she said most things. But Keanu had only looked at her and said, "No one else can say it like you." She stepped up to the podium that evening in a gray cardigan and simple jeans, holding a folded piece of paper in trembling hands. There were no cameras, no social media, just people watching, waiting. "My name," she began, is Maggie Steele. And for a long time, I believed my worth ended when I lost my footing. The room fell silent. I worked in this industry for years, not as a face on a screen, but as the person behind the emails, behind the schedules, behind the one who needed to show up for all of you. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I left when I couldn't protect the people I loved. I lived in silence because I thought I was a burden, because I thought no one would understand. A woman in the third row reached for a tissue. But I was wrong, Maggie continued. What we give in quiet doesn't go unnoticed, and what we carry alone, we don't have to carry forever. No applause followed her speech. That wasn't the kind of night it was. Instead, people stood, slowly and quietly, embraced one another. Keanu walked over to her, not with praise, but with stillness, gratitude. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Outside, the moon glowed softly across the dark hilltops. Inside, something new had begun. Next morning. Maggie sat at the breakfast table with a mug of tea when Alex rushed in, with a phone in hand. "It's out," he said. Keanu turned toward him. "What's out?" "The video someone filmed last night." Maggie's speech. "It's all over Twitter, over 1 million views already." Maggie's face froze, her fingers tightened around the ceramic handle. "I said no cameras. I said no spotlight." Keanu walked over slowly and sat beside her. "It wasn't us. Someone must have broken the rules." "I can't do this again, Keanu," she whispered. "I can't be the face of anything." "You're not," he said gently. "You're the soul of it." But Maggie stood up and left the room without another word. Upstairs, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, her body trembling. She had opened her heart for one quiet moment, and now the world had taken it. Keanu didn't follow. He simply slipped a note under her door later that afternoon. It read, "The world saw your truth. Let's make sure they also see your terms." And beneath that, in bold, "No more shadows, only horizons." The morning it happened, Maggie sat at her modest desk in the Horizon Project's temporary office, an unused wing in a downtown co-working space Keanu had quietly rented. The sun had barely risen, casting soft light across her folders. She was reviewing handwritten notes for an upcoming partner meeting when Rosa entered with a strange look. "Maggie," Rosa said gently, "you need to see this." Maggie took the phone in silence. On the screen was a headline from a gossip site, plastered with an old red carpet photo of her standing behind Keanu. It read, "Keanu's secret angel. Actor rescues homeless former assistant." The article twisted everything. Her name was mentioned briefly, her face blurred, but the implication was loud. She was a silent, broken woman whom Keanu had pitied into employment. It felt like being dragged naked into a spotlight she had long since escaped. She handed the phone back, her hands trembling. "Who leaked it?" Maggie asked, voice low. Rosa shook her head. "No idea. Someone must have overheard the donor dinner." Keanu arrived moments later, having seen the article on his way in. His face was calm, but his eyes held storm clouds. "I'll handle it," he told her. But Maggie was already packing her bag. "No, this was never supposed to be about me. This was supposed to be quiet, effective, off the radar." He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It still is. This isn't your fault." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she hadn't seen in years. Unknown caller, voicemail pending. With a strange twist in her stomach, she played the message. "Maggie Steele," the voice said coldly. "You've been warned once. Talking to the press about sealed cases is grounds for legal retaliation. Pacifica Corps will not tolerate defamation. Withdraw from the project immediately, or be prepared for consequences." The voice was unmistakable. Ryder Caldwell. Keanu heard it too. "Had threatened you?" he asked, fury growing in his voice. Maggie didn't answer. Her breath caught in her throat. This was exactly what she feared, being used as leverage, bringing him down with her. Rosa stepped in between them. "You two need to sit, right now." But before anyone could say another word, Diane Morgan burst through the door, holding a manila envelope. She had fire in her eyes. "I was hoping this day would never come," she said. "But it has." She laid the folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were documents, copies of sealed injury reports, Maggie's original lawsuit filings, email threads threatening her with ruin. "These," Diane said, "are going public." Maggie's hands trembled as she picked up one of the pages. "I can't let you risk yourselves for me," she said. Keanu looked at her, voice steady. "No one's risking anything. We're telling the truth. It's about time they answered for it." Diane nodded. "This isn't just about you anymore. Thomas wasn't the only victim. I found at least 4 other former workers. Same threats, same injuries, same outcomes. They all settled. Quietly." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Maggie whispered, "Okay, let's do it." That afternoon, Diane got to work. She had connections in both independent journalism circles and national media outlets that still valued integrity over spectacle. With Maggie's reluctant consent, she compiled the story into a comprehensive exposé: the injury, the lawsuit, the corporate threats, and the trail of silenced victims. Keanu's legal team reviewed every word, ensuring that the piece didn't just make noise, it struck with precision. By sunset, the article went live on Truthline News under the title, "The Price of Silence: How Pacifica Corps Crushed a Family and Nearly Broke a Legacy." Within hours, it began to spread. Quietly at first, then as fast as fire. The public reacted swiftly. Readers were furious, not just because of the corporate cover-up, but because of how far Maggie had fallen trying to protect those around her. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't tried to profit from it. She had simply endured. Thousands of comments poured in. Some were former employees. Others were strangers, moved by her dignity. One read, "I used to work with Thomas. We all knew what happened, but were too scared to talk. I'm so sorry, Maggie." Another, "You shouldn't have had to protect him alone. Thank you for your strength." Keanu watched the response unfold from the back office with Alex and Jordan Wells. His legal team had already begun preparing the framework for 2 potential lawsuits, one for wrongful termination and defamation against Pacifica Corps, and another for intimidation and obstruction related to Maggie's prior attempts to speak out. "We'll file under Maggie's name if she consents," Jordan said. "But we'll attach your name too, publicly." "I don't care," Keanu said. "She carried this pain for too long. I'm here now." Across town, Maggie stayed quiet as the world finally learned her story. She refused interviews. She declined invitations to speak on television or write a memoir. Instead, she kept showing up to work at the Horizon Project each morning, setting up chairs, answering emails, reviewing grant applications. To her, action was always more powerful than applause. Rosa noticed something different in her, though. A slight lightness in her step. Maggie no longer avoided mirrors. She met people's eyes again. It wasn't pride exactly. It was release. One evening, as they locked up the office, Maggie paused by the door. "You think it's enough?" she asked Rosa. Rosa smiled. "It's a start, and starts matter." The next morning, Maggie arrived to find a manila envelope on her desk, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 typed sentences. "Thank you. I was too afraid to speak, but your story gave me courage. I'm telling mine next. We're with you." No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. By the end of the week, 2 more articles had gone live from other victims. Pacifica Corps' name was now trending for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, writer Caldwell had gone silent. But everyone knew silence from a man like that didn't mean retreat. It meant reloading. Keanu met with Jordan again. "He'll come back harder," Jordan warned. Keanu nodded. "Then we'll hold the line." Because for the first time in years, Maggie Steele wasn't standing alone. 2 days later, Ryder Caldwell finally resurfaced. His return came not through a direct statement, but a polished op-ed in a major financial newspaper. The headline read, "When false narratives threaten real industry, a corporate leader responds." It didn't mention Maggie or Thomas by name, but the implications were clear. The article painted Pacificacor as a company under attack by emotional activism and manipulated stories. It framed the accusations as a smear campaign, one meant to damage a respected logistics empire during an economic downturn. But the article wasn't the real blow. That came an hour later, when a cease and desist letter was delivered to Diane Morgan, Keanu Reeves, and the Horizon Project office. In it, Caldwell accused them of defamation, interference with business relationships, and intentional emotional distress. He demanded an immediate retraction and threatened financial penalties if they didn't comply. Maggie sat with the letter in her hands, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but fury. She had read every line, every veiled threat, and for a moment she felt herself slipping back into that old silence, that helpless feeling that used to live in her bones. But then she remembered the manila envelope, the anonymous letter, the other voices rising with hers now. The weight didn't crush her this time, it steadied her. She looked up at Keanu, sitting across the table in Rose's office. "I can fight this," she said quietly. Keanu didn't respond with a speech or a promise. He just nodded and said, "You won't have to do it alone." Diane entered the room next, already on the phone with the legal analyst. "Let him sue," she said. "We're countersuing, but more than that, we're publishing again." "What more is there?" Maggie asked. Diane turned her laptop around and hit play on a video. It was an old clip, filmed by a worker at a Pacificacor warehouse. In it, a supervisor barked orders, ignored a broken lift, and mocked a worker for hesitating to climb it. That worker, clearly limping, was Thomas Steele. The date matched the week before his injury. The footage had been buried online for years, but someone had found it. "This changes everything," Diane said. "It's proof, real, unedited, damning proof." Maggie leaned forward, watching her husband in the grainy footage. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched, her face carved in stone. Later that night, Keanu sat alone in the garden behind his home. Maggie joined him. No words were exchanged for a long time, just the rustle of wind through the trees. Eventually, she said, "I thought I was protecting everyone by staying silent." "You were," Keanu replied. "But silence gave them space to grow louder." She looked up at the stars, her voice steadier now. "And let's be louder." The next morning, Keanu's team filed a public countersuit against Pacificacor and Ryder Caldwell, naming Maggie Steele as a co-plaintiff. The filing included the video evidence, the emergency fund denial, the leaked letter, and a sworn affidavit from a former Pacificacor HR executive who had recently come forward. By noon, major outlets were reporting, Keanu Reeves takes on Pacificacor in landmark case of corporate abuse. And though Maggie still declined every interview, the world had started to say her name again, not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to vanish. It began with a rusted lockbox, tucked inside the back of a closet in Liam's apartment. The shelter had returned Maggie's remaining belongings in 2 battered cardboard boxes, mostly clothes, old books, and a faded coat she hadn't worn in years. But the lockbox was different. It was heavy, cold to the touch, and marked with her neat handwriting on a strip of masking tape. "Private, do not discord." Liam stared at it for a long time before calling Keanu. They met in Keanu's garage that evening, a quiet space lit by a single hanging bulb. The box sat between them on the workbench, flanked by silence and memory. Liam didn't say much. He just handed over the small key he'd found hidden inside one of his mother's old notebooks. The lock clicked open with a soft snap. Inside were neatly stacked files, photographs, and a small black USB drive held in place by a folded cloth napkin. The first thing Keanu noticed was a stack of printed photos. Grainy but clear, they showed exposed wires, rusted railings, oil pooling beneath conveyor belts. Images of the warehouse floor where Thomas had once worked. There were time-stamped labels on the back of each one. Each label had Maggie's handwriting. Some had red ink markings, circles around malfunctioning parts, arrows pointing to warning labels that had been scraped off. It wasn't just documentation, it was a paper trail, a map of negligence. Beneath the photos were handwritten witness accounts, statements from coworkers. Some were scribbled in pencil, others typed on thin paper and signed with only initials. One note stood out. It read, "I told the manager 3 times the machine was seizing. He said it would get fixed eventually." Liam's hands trembled as he unfolded a letter at the bottom of the box. "This one's to me," he whispered, "but she never gave it to me." Keanu stepped back, giving him space. The letter wasn't long. Maggie had written it sometime in 2015. In it, she apologized for keeping things hidden. She told Liam she'd been gathering evidence not to win a lawsuit, but to ensure no other family would go through what theirs did. She knew Pacific Accor's reach was long and dangerous. That's why she locked everything away. In her words, sometimes protecting the truth means guarding it until the right moment finds you. Keanu turned his attention to the USB drive. It was labeled TS Videos. Plugging it into his laptop, he and Liam watched the first file play. The screen lit up with grainy footage of a break room. Tomas sat facing the camera, wearing a dusty uniform. He spoke slowly, his voice tight. "If you're watching this, I guess the worst happened," he began. "This place, it's not just unsafe, it's reckless. They've ignored our reports for months." The next few clips showed machinery in motion, loud grinding noises, belt slippage, malfunctioning safety guards. One clip zoomed in on a handwritten logbook with several ignored service requests. The dates aligned with the injury timeline. Keanu closed the laptop carefully, the weight of the discovery sinking into his chest. These weren't just files. They were Maggie's last line of defense. They were Thomas's voice, still speaking after years of silence. And they were enough to expose everything. Keanu didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, the box of evidence beside him, the weight of everything pressing into his shoulders. He had seen studios bury lawsuits. He had watched executives spin narratives so tightly the truth suffocated underneath. But this was different. This wasn't about image or career. It was about people. And someone he cared about had paid the price in silence. The next morning, Keanu made a call. The federal investigator's office was cautious at first. Too many celebrity-driven cases ended up as headlines, not justice. But when he mentioned Pacific Accor and provided a preview of the USB contents, their tone shifted. By noon, a secure meeting was arranged. Jordan Wells, his lawyer, joined him at the appointed federal building. In a small, windowless conference room, Keanu placed the open lockbox on the table in front of 2 agents. He explained how Maggie had stored the files, how they were discovered, and who Thomas Steele was. The agents reviewed the materials in silence, each document unfolding like a buried history finally seeing daylight. When they reached the witness statements, one of them let out a low whistle. These weren't casual complaints. These were damning. Keanu handed over the USB last. He didn't speak as they watched the clips. Thomas's face filled the screen again, this time in a dim warehouse hallway. "Pacific Accor knows," Thomas said. "We've reported it, they've logged it, but they don't fix it because it costs money. And now, if something happens to me, I want this on record." The agents paused the video and looked up. One of them leaned forward. Did your team verify the authenticity of these recordings? Keanu nodded. Timestamped metadata matched to building maintenance logs we found in her files, and Liam remembers his father preparing them. They both nodded. One of them murmured, "This could be enough to reopen a federal investigation." Keanu didn't smile. He just sat there, quietly, knowing how much Maggie had risked to preserve the truth. She could have destroyed the box. She could have lost hope. But she hadn't. She kept it, waiting for someone to believe her. After the meeting, Keanu stood outside the federal building for a long moment. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to what had just happened inside. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about Maggie, alone in that shelter, never knowing her silence had been heard. He called Liam from the car. "She kept everything," Keanu said, "and it's going to matter. It's going to matter a lot." Liam didn't speak for several seconds. When he did, his voice cracked. Shim always said truth had a heartbeat, that even when buried, it finds its way out. Keanu nodded, staring out at the traffic. It's finding its way now. Back at the guest house, Maggie sat bundled in a sweater Rosa had brought her. She didn't ask where Keanu had gone, but something in her eyes suggested she knew he'd seen the box. She looked tired, but not defeated. He didn't tell her what the agents had said. Not yet. Instead, he walked over and placed a cup of tea on the table beside her. She glanced at it, then at him. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then quietly said, "I found what you were willing to carry for the rest of us." Maggie turned away, blinking fast. "It wasn't supposed to fall on you." "It didn't," he said. "You caught it before it could." The headlines came quietly at first. A short press release from the Department of Labor announced a federal investigation into Pacific Corps' workplace safety violations. But within days, the story ballooned. Leaked documents, whistleblower testimonies, and the evidence Liam had found all corroborated a cover-up that had spanned years. Investigators swarmed the logistics giant's warehouses across 3 states. The files Keanu had delivered, paired with Thomas's hidden videos, left little room for interpretation. This wasn't just negligence, it was criminal indifference. Ryder Caldwell tried to get ahead of the story. He held a press conference, deflecting blame, painting Maggie as a disgruntled former employee with an agenda. But Diane Morgan was ready. Her article dropped the next morning. Front page, nationally syndicated. It detailed every threat Maggie had endured, the letters, the surveillance, the erased appeals. It exposed how Pacific Corps had used Ryder to intimidate victims into silence and weaponized the law against the very people it had harmed. By the end of the week, Ryder was facing a formal ethics review. A month later, he was disbarred for professional misconduct. Keanu remained mostly out of the spotlight. He didn't need the cameras or the interviews. The truth was doing its own work now. But he made one quiet visit to Thomas's care facility, where Maggie, Liam, and Thomas were watching the hearings unfold on TV. Keanu brought no cameras, no speeches, just a small basket of homemade bread and a quiet smile. Thomas, still limited in speech, managed a single word as Keanu entered. "Thanks." When the federal charges were formally filed against Pacific Corps' leadership, it made international news. OSHA violations, obstruction of justice, fraud. The company agreed to a massive settlement. Part of the deal required them to publicly fund an industry-wide reform initiative, including training programs, third-party audits, and a compensation fund for injured workers like Thomas. Keanu refused any personal credit, but internally, everyone knew. The needle didn't move until he stepped in. Maggie watched the news from a small bench just outside the rehabilitation center's garden. The sun was low, painting everything gold. Her fingers trembled as she held the paper in her lap, one headline after another detailing Pacific Corps' downfall. But none of that felt as real as the email from Congress she had received that morning. It was formal, respectful, and clear. They were inviting her to speak, virtually, at a public oversight hearing about corporate retaliation and labor reform. She stared at the screen for almost an hour before replying. When the time came, Maggie wore a plain navy sweater and tied her hair back, just like she used to during the quiet days working late in Keanu's office. Her voice didn't shake. She told the panel what it meant to feel invisible, what it meant to be told to accept injustice or risk ruining lives. She spoke about her decision to disappear, not for cowardice, but to protect the people she loved. When it was over, there were no applause, just silence. The kind that meant people were listening. That silence rippled far beyond Capitol Hill. Donations to the Horizon Project surged. Public interest in labor protections reignited. And, at the heart of it all, was a woman who had once eaten soup in an alley and asked only to be left alone. Later that week, Keanu met with Liam in a quiet office downtown. The Horizon Project was growing fast, and they needed someone who understood both pain and resilience. Liam, with his lived experience and technical know-how, was a perfect fit. Keanu offered him a permanent position, full benefits, flexible hours, room to grow. "You're not just part of this," Keanu said. "You're helping build what your mother started." Liam hesitated, tears caught just behind his steady eyes. Then he nodded. A few weeks later, Maggie stood in front of a crowd gathered under a small white tent near a brand-new transitional shelter. The shelter bore no corporate logo, no celebrity names, just a bronze plaque that read, "For those who kept going when no one was watching." She took the stage, not as a former secretary or a case file in a lawsuit, but as the keynote speaker. The tent hushed as Maggie stepped to the podium. She didn't have notes. She didn't need them. Her voice was steady but soft, like someone speaking across a kitchen table, not to a crowd of donors, volunteers, and press. "I used to believe that silence was the strongest shield," she said. "That if you stayed quiet long enough, maybe the world would leave you alone. But silence doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps others in the dark." She paused, her eyes finding Rosa near the front row. Then Liam, arms crossed, standing beside Thomas in a wheelchair. Thomas's head was tilted slightly, his expression unreadable but focused. "I disappeared," Maggie continued. "Not because I was ashamed, but because I thought if people found out what I knew, they'd come after the ones I cared about. And I was right. They did. But something else happened too. One man didn't give up on me." Murmurs rippled through the audience, but she didn't say Keanu's name. She didn't have to. She looked toward him briefly, just long enough for him to nod once, his hands clasped together in front of him, as if holding the moment like something sacred. "This shelter," she said, gesturing behind her, "isn't about charity. It's about dignity, about making sure the next person who falls doesn't have to vanish to survive." Applause broke out, starting slowly then rising with warmth that filled the space between every folding chair and plastic cup of coffee. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was real. After the ceremony, Maggie walked the halls of the shelter. She ran her fingers along the smooth wooden handrails, nodded to a teenage girl drawing in a notebook by the window, offered a soft hello to an elderly man folding blankets. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere again. Outside, Keanu waited by the car, hands in his pockets. "Was it too much?" Maggie asked, her voice quiet, unsure. "No," Keanu said, holding the door open for her. "It was just enough." And as they drove away, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some storms didn't need more words. They just needed to pass, so the rebuilding could begin. The late afternoon light spilled through the rehab center's wide windows, casting soft amber hues on the tiled floor. Keanu sat beside Maggie on a quiet bench in the observation room. Her eyes were fixed on the therapy area, where Thomas was seated in a specialized wheelchair, stretching his fingers with the help of a physical therapist. His movements were slow, deliberate, but unmistakably stronger than they had been weeks ago. Maggie leaned forward, both hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Her breath hitched when she saw Thomas smile. It wasn't much, just a small curve of the lips, subtle and fragile. But it was the first real smile she'd seen on his face in years. Her hand instinctively reached for the glass window, as if she could touch him through it. Keanu said nothing. He simply sat with her, allowing the weight of the moment to settle between them. In the silence, there was healing. After all the lawsuits, the headlines, the tension, and the quiet battles no one else had ever seen, this moment stood apart. "We made it," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu turned to look at her. "You made it," he replied, gently. She shook her head, tears now sliding down her cheeks. "No, not alone." For years, Maggie had believed that strength meant solitude, that to protect others, she had to bear the burden in silence, that by staying invisible, she could shield the ones she loved. But now, watching Thomas come back to life, watching her son Liam begin to breathe easier, she finally allowed herself to believe something different. Maybe rising wasn't something you did alone. Maybe it was something you did together. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was a photo Maggie hadn't seen in years, one of her and Keanu on a film set in Vancouver, arms around each other, both grinning and covered in mud after a sudden rainstorm delayed shooting. On the back of the photo, it simply read, "No one rises alone." She looked at the message, then at him. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said, "because when I couldn't stand, you stood for me." She smiled softly, tears drying on her face. "Then I'll keep standing. For them." 2 weeks later, Maggie stood outside a small shelter on the east side of the city. She wore a simple blouse, her hair pulled back, and held a worn clipboard pressed against her chest. The shelter had just reopened after renovations funded by the Horizon project. It wasn't just paint and new bedding, it was safer, warmer, and staffed by people who had walked the path themselves. She stepped up to the ribbon as Rosa handed her a pair of scissors. A small crowd gathered. Residents, volunteers, donors. Liam stood near the back, quietly proud. Keanu was there too, far off to the side, hands in his pockets, not seeking attention. He gave her a small nod. Maggie took a breath and cut the ribbon. There was polite applause followed by a hush. She didn't plan to speak, but something shifted inside her. She stepped forward, voice clear but quiet. "I used to believe that dignity meant silence," she said. "That if I just kept my head down, carried the weight alone, everything would eventually be okay. But silence doesn't heal. Truth does." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "This shelter isn't just a roof. It's a start, a space where people can be seen without judgment, where they can begin again." She didn't mention Pacifica Core. She didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew the truth. Later, Keanu found her seated on the back steps of the shelter, away from the crowd. The wind picked up, rustling a few fallen leaves across the sidewalk. He sat beside her. "Liam told me something today," Keanu said. "He said, he finally sees you the way I always did." Maggie looked down, emotion tightening in her throat. "I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again." "You don't need to be whole," Keanu replied. "You just need to be here." They sat in silence for a while longer. The horizon in the distance glowed with a deep orange streak as the sun began to set. Children laughed faintly in the background. A bus pulled away from the curb. Then, Maggie spoke once more, her voice soft but sure. "In the hardest moments," she said, "we carry each other, and in carrying each other, we rise." Her words would later open the Foundation's official homepage. They would echo in community centers, rehab clinics, and support groups across the country. But that evening, they were just between the two of them. And they were enough. Have you ever known someone who sacrificed everything in silence? Share their story in the comments. What story would you like to see next about Keanu's journey to help those forgotten by society?